Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the many works of Junji Ito as I explain every one of his stories. This video we're going to look at a ton of Junji Ito one-shots that have never been officially translated into English. We're moving into the last leg of this series and I've gone through most of the English collection releases, but there's still a ton of stories left. I'm sure in the future Viz will translate and release these officially, but for now, big shout out to all the online translators out there for the scanlations, otherwise I would not be able to cover many of these. So this video is slightly shorter than the last, but I'll make up for it as I'm planning on releasing a video every week until I finish up the series, hopefully by the end of the year. Anyway, you know the drill at this point, so let's just get into the video. This is every single Junji Ito manga explained, part 7. The Red String. Like many of Ito's earlier stories, The Red String begins with a breakup. A girl named Momoko tells her boyfriend Ishii that they're through, harshly breaking the guy's heart. Ishii then stays in bed for 3 days crying, but eventually starts feeling better and decides to go back to school. His friends give him a hard time and say that they were worried he hurt himself or something because of the breakup. One friend even mockingly looks at his arm and, oddly enough, actually does find something. A line of red stitches across his wrist. Now Ishii's friends are legitimately worried and Ishii is confused. He tries to cut the red string out with a razor, but no luck. It's almost like it's made of steel. His teacher sees what he's doing and sends him to the nurse. Ishii mentions that his stomach is feeling itchy as well, and he takes off his shirt to reveal even more stitches all over his body. At this point, he goes to a dermatologist, but even the doctor has no clue what the hell's going on. Why would someone stitch him up with red string, and why is it impossible to cut? The doctor decides it can't be man-made and just some kind of bizarre skin condition. That night, Ishii shows his family, and his grandpa believes it's a 1,000-stitch belt. He explains that in the old days, when men went to war, women would give them cloth with 1,000 stitches, each stitch done by a different woman. This is a real thing, by the way. It was called senin bari, which means 1,000 needles. Anyway, Ishii's grandpa believes that his dead wife, Ishii's grandma, is stitching this belt directly into his skin from the afterlife. That night, Ishii wakes up to find his grandma standing in his room. She's accompanied by a dozen women, all with needles, and some of them look like zombies with their bodies mutilated. They all move in on Ishii, demanding he remove his clothes and begin to stitch up his skin. Kinda reminds me of Billions Alone at this point. Well, Ishii really wakes up this time to find that it was only a nightmare. However, the red string is still there. The next day at school, the students are all staring at him and he discovers that he now has red string on his face as well. Momoko approaches Ishii and starts chewing him out, assuming that the whole thing is some kind of sick prank to get back at her. Apparently, when Ishii and Momoko were together, he would tell people that he and Momoko were tied together by the red string of fate, and now that they broke up, it seems Momoko thinks he's using the red stitches as symbolism. As if now that the string of fate is cut, it's winding up inside of his body. Ishii contemplates whether this truly is the red string of fate, and the next day he wakes up to find his entire body covered in them. He's oddly casual about the whole thing, just going about his morning routine and heading to school. When he arrives, he finds that the red string is now covering him at an alarming rate, wrapping around his body and face, even covering his eye. He tracks down Momoko, thinking if he can get back with her, they will reconnect the red string of fate and it'll stop consuming his body. He basically looks like a red mummy monster or something at this point, and he can't speak to her because the string is now covering his mouth. As he collapses to the ground, he tries to shoot the string at Momoko, but her new boyfriend shows up and it hits him instead. The boyfriend's now consumed in the mass as Ishii resembles a large spool. It keeps growing until it's the size of a school bus. As Momoko watches it grow, she says she knew the thread would be a problem and that that's why she broke up with Ishii in the first place. She thinks she's made the right call in cutting it. The comic ends as she looks at her wrist, seeing 3 red stitches and saying, compared to him, this is nothing. The Supernatural Transfer Student. This story begins with a group of friends who have formed a supernatural club. The leader, Shibiyama, successfully bends and breaks a spoon using what looks like only his mind. He calls this an awoken ability and says that non-believers would just call it a trick. Another member, Kitagawa, says that that's a good thing since only believers will be saved, whatever that means. Apparently, Shibiyama has been asked to make a TV appearance to demonstrate his psychic abilities, and the club is pumped about it. They also mention that Kitagawa has powers as well. He can see their inner spirits, but he's much more modest about it than Shibiyama. Later in class, a new student is introduced. His name's Sukano, and he's kind of a strange kid. He says he likes going on walks and that he often encounters strange and mysterious events. Later, Hisatani and Shibiyama from the group discuss whether they should invite Sukano into the Supernatural Club. They spot him walking by and ask him how he likes the area. He says the area is ripe for supernatural experiences, and they go ahead and ask if he'll join the club. Just then, Sukano spots something in the grass nearby. He finds a disturbing flower that has an eyeball growing out of the top. He runs off with the flower, saying that this town is amazing. The other two are just staring at the bizarre plant in disbelief. At the next club meeting, they show off the mysterious plant, and Kitagawa says he can sense the spirit of an unrestful soul within it. He says he believes it to be the spirit of a samurai that was transferred to the spot where the eye flowers are now growing. Shibayama shows off his spoon trick again, and then Sukano says he wants to try. Amazingly, he breaks the spoon as well. Everyone is shocked, thinking Sukano also has psychic powers, but he immediately starts laughing and says he actually tricked them. He simply switched the spoon out with one that was already about to break. He says if you practice sleight of hand, it's easy. Shibayama's pretty uncomfortable at this point, but says that to be clear, he's actually using telekinesis. Sukano says, of course, but since I don't have powers, I have to rely on tricks. Later, Kitagawa approaches Hidesani and mentions that the new kid has really shaken things up. The trick he did with the spoon looked exactly like the way Shibayama does it, implying maybe he's doing a trick as well. Sukano shows up and tells him he's discovered something he wants to show to the group. He leads them to a huge waterfall by the school that no one seemed to notice before. He says that this waterfall is supernatural and that he tried to touch the water and then something mysterious happened. He then fires an energy blast out of his hand, DBZ style, and kills a bird with it. It seems like the waterfall gave him these powers. Soon the spot became known as the unfamiliar waterfall since it seemingly appeared out of nowhere. A few days later, Shibayama has gone missing. Kitagawa uses his powers to sense Shibayama's whereabouts and says he's troubled by what he's sensing. They arrive at the waterfall and Kitagawa explains that Shibayama's spirit is somewhere in the basin of the waterfall and speculates that he must have thrown himself into it because of the pressure of being on TV. He says that Shibayama's spirit has been bound to this place and that he doesn't think the remains will be able to be removed. Sukano shows up and says that he believes Shibayama died trying to get hit by the waterfall so that he could acquire real powers. Later, Sukano runs up to the club members and says he discovered something again, a massive lake. Sure enough, the lake exists, but the club members say that there was a residential neighborhood here before. So what happened to the people who live there? At this point, Hidesani is getting angry, associating the mysterious events with Sukano and blaming Shibayama's death on him. Sukano just laughs it off and is as enthusiastic as ever. As he talks, a massive sea creature rises up from the lake looking like a pimple-covered Godzilla. Meanwhile, we see the waterfall and a person crawling out of the basin. The three female members of the Supernatural Club decide to stay together since they're pretty freaked out by Sukano. They hear a knock at the door and the voice of Shibayama tells them to please open up. But when Hidesani opens the door, she sees a disgusting sight. Shibayama's decomposing, bloated body. She freaks out and slams the door, and we can hear Shibayama yelling from the other side. Finally, the door bursts open with massive force and he enters chasing after the girls. They run out the back door and find Kitagawa standing by some large Easter Island style statues. He says when he came home, his house was replaced by them. Sukano pops up like usual, celebrating the mysterious find, and Hidesani accuses him of changing their town into a strange world. He denies this, saying he simply found this while out on a walk. The rotting Shibayama comes around the corner and Kitagawa seems shocked at the sight of him. Shibayama then points a finger at him and shoots out an energy blast. It hits the statue, nearly crushing Kitagawa, and he fires again. This time, Kitagawa dodges it by flying into the air. He then shoots back with his own power, hitting and killing Shibayama for good. Sukano is delighted by Kitagawa's powers and says he saw how he got them, explaining that he saw Kitagawa pushing Shibayama into the basin before touching the waterfall himself for the powers. Kitagawa says he's pleased by this new mysterious world and wants to team up with Sukano, but Sukano denies him, saying he can't live up to his expectations. After this, we learn that Sukano moved to another town, transferring to another school, and shortly after he left, the town returned to normal. According to the rumors, Kitagawa went searching for him, and just like that, the Supernatural Club disbanded. The Bridge. This story follows Kanako, a woman on her way to visit her grandmother. Her grandma called her and asked her to come soon and seemed pretty freaked out, so Kanako drove out to the country where her grandma lives alone. She parks her car to the side of the main road and makes the rest of the journey on foot. She finally spots her grandma's house on the other side of a bridge and starts making her way across. She sees a person standing in the middle of the bridge and assumes this to be a friend of her grandmother's. When she gets a closer look, however, it seems to be a kind of zombie with its face decaying. Kanako runs to her grandma's house and asks who the hell was on the bridge. Her grandmother lets her inside and explains that that is her uncle who passed away when she was a child. Now he appears every night on the bridge, along with many other ghosts of people who have died in the village. They stand on the bridge and call her name night after night. She says they're not at peace and want to drag her into the river. Kanako looks outside to see dozens of the undead calling to her grandmother from the bridge. Her grandmother tells her that the village had a custom after death. They would put the bodies of the recently deceased on a straw straw mat and let them float down the river, passing under the bridge. If they made it past the bridge and down the river, their soul would be at peace, but oftentimes the mat would crash into the side of the bridge, dropping the body into the river, which is what happened to Kaneko's great uncle. Yeah, this seems like a terrible custom. And we see that many more villagers had the same fate over the years, including the grandmother's first love and fiance, Shoukichi, who was 8 feet tall and got stuck on the bridge before falling into the water. The grandmother says she thought she saw Shoukichi open his eyes for a moment before sinking. We see him amongst the dead outside, and he's particularly creepy because he's so tall standing there by the bridge. The grandmother thinks the ghosts have appeared because she's meant to die soon. She begs Kaneko to bury her in the ground and not to allow her to sink into the river. Then she collapses dead. Kaneko cries out and suddenly wakes up in her car. I guess that all of that was a dream and she had pulled over to nap on the way to her grandmother's house. So she makes her way once again, but notices there's still a figure on the bridge just like in her dream. This time she just walks past the figure and straight up to the house, not getting a closer look. She searches the house but finds no sign of her grandmother. She does, however, find that a straw mat had been pulled up from the house. She goes back outside to find the massive ghosts are real and crowded around the bridge. They look down into the river and we see Kaneko's grandmother floating on the mat. For a moment it seems she opens her eyes and looks directly at Kaneko. Then, just like all the others, she crashes into the bridge and falls off the mat. As her body sinks to the bottom of the river, we can see the many figures under the water moving toward her, and that is the bridge. The circus comes to town. The circus is here, and a teen boy is running to see the show, leaving his sister behind because she's too slow. The boy arrives just in time before they close the tent and finds his buddies have saved him a seat. The ringleader comes out, introducing everyone to the Papyrus Circus, starting with the first act, some clowns. They don't seem to know what they're doing, and one clown falls off the ball he's trying to balance on, hitting the ground pretty hard. Well, they are clowns, it's probably just part of the act. The other two clowns drag off his body, and the next act is introduced. A beautiful tightrope walker named Lelia. The teen boy says that he saw her at the park sitting and staring off into space, and that he and his boys were immediately infatuated, which is why they wanted to come to the circus in the first place. The next performance is stacked tightrope walking, with 3 men on each other's shoulders attempting to walk the rope. Of course, they fail almost immediately and come brutally crashing to the ground. The ringleader laughs it off and continues the show. Meanwhile, the little sister from earlier is outside trying to find a way in. She finally just crawls under a section of the tent and pokes her head in. She sees a pile of bodies made up of the dead performers and 2 men having a conversation. One is a knife thrower named Joe, who says he's not going to end up like these dead losers, as he's a true professional. They make their way to the stage, and the other guy, now dressed in drag, is pinned to the board while Joe begins throwing knives at him, perfectly outlining his body. He then declares himself the circus star, and the ringleader doesn't look too happy and doesn't agree that he's the circus star either, whatever that means. He tells Joe to keep throwing as he's not done yet, and the next knife Joe throws is way off, hitting a post. He tries again, and this time his knife hits his assistant square in the neck, killing him. As they drag the body off the stage, Joe asks if he can try one more time. He attempts to do a new trick where he lays on the ground and throws the knives into the air using gravity to make himself the target. The first knife lands right next to his head, but the second stabs him through the chest. After this, there is a series of acts all going wrong. A fire breather lights himself on fire, the human rocket explodes, and the lion tamer is mauled to death. At this point, the crowd is completely speechless in fear, and the last act is brought out. A trapeze artist named Mario, who's going to perform the final performance with the beautiful Lelia. However, before they begin, Lelia tells Mario not to do it. She says he's been tricked by the ringleader, who is actually a god of death, and that he reaps human souls using Lelia as his tool to do so. Mario just shrugs her off, saying he's gonna be the true circus star, and then he can properly propose to her. As he swings on the trapeze, the ropes break, causing him to fall to his death. The ringleader begins to cry, saying that this is a tragedy. All the performers are dead. He asks the crowd for their help to rebuild the circus, saying that anyone with talent can join, and that if you become the circus star, you'll be awarded Lelia's hand in marriage. Meanwhile, the only surviving member of the troupe, a clown, tries to convince Lelia to come down and they'll escape together. The chief catches wise to this, though, and suddenly Joe's knife from earlier falls out of the post and right into the clown. The ringleader looks at the crowd, asking them if they've made their decision, and in the final panel, we see the little sister crying to her mom that her brother left with the circus. Next up is Beehive. Takuno and his girlfriend Yoriko are on a stroll and talking about Takuno's obsession with bees. Apparently up until late, this guy wouldn't shut up about them. The couple stop for a smooch, but it's interrupted by a massive hornet flying by. Takano immediately begins running after it, and Yoriko follows behind. Suddenly, Takano stops chasing it, saying, "I can't believe it went in that direction." Yoriko asks why he stopped, and he just changes the subject, asking if she'll come look at his beehive collection. She accuses accuses him of being afraid of the ghost that supposedly lives in these woods. Apparently it sounds like a kid moaning. Then she mentions the weird kid who went missing a while ago. She says she met him on the same day she met Takano when there was a beehive on her house. We get a flashback and Yoriko is discussing the situation with her neighbors who say there's a weird little kid that will collect it with his bare hands for free. Then Takano walks by and sees the nest. He asks if he could take the beehive since he collects them, but says he'll need to come back at night when they're less active so he doesn't get stung. Just then a strange kid shows up and says he'll take it. He says that this area used to be all forest till people came in and cut down the trees. Now the wasps have nowhere to go, so he thinks people should just go away. Then he climbs up and grabs the nest casually without getting stung at all. Takano's kind of pissed off since he wanted that hive, and this isn't the first one of his hives that's been snatched up under his nose. He accuses the kid of taking them, and the boy just says he's saving them from suckers like Takano. Then some bees fly out of the hive and attack Takano. Yoriko comes up to help him, and this is when the two connected with each other, so it worked out in the end. We get another flashback sometime after this when Takano shows Yoriko how he finds hornets' nests. He attaches small balls of tuna with cotton that the hornets pick up to bring back to the larva. He then uses the cotton as a tracer to easily track them. The two track the hornet to a small cave. Takano asks Yoriko to wait outside since it could be dangerous. Inside, he finds the weird kid holding up 2 dead frogs to feed the wasps. It's a pretty disturbing sight. The wasps were crawling all over the kid who seems unfazed. Back in the present, Takano is showing off his collection when Yoriko says she believes the ghost is actually that of the kid and that someone must have killed him and buried his body in the woods. Late at night, Takano is heading back into the woods when he reveals that he encountered the kid once more and was attacked by the wasps. In the end, he strangled the boy and buried his body. Because of the rumors, he's decided he should move it in case someone comes poking around. While looking for the body, Takano finds a beehive on the ground. Luckily, he brought some insecticide along and decides to collect it since he's out here anyway. Some men show up with flashlights and Takano furiously digs the hive out. It seems like it's stuck on a tree root or something, so he has a hard time cutting it out, but finally gets it free and runs before the men catch him. When he gets back to his apartment, he finds there's blood on the bottom of the beehive and he assumes he hit a mole or something while he was digging. The next day, Yoriko shows up and tells him that the strange boy's body was found buried in the woods, only his head was chopped off, and that some men saw a man running away with his severed head. Takano slams the door on Yoriko and goes to investigate the hive. He looks inside to find a grotesque sight. The boy's head is inside. Takano begins piecing together that the boy must have been alive when he was buried, and that the hornets built the hive around his head and were bringing him food to keep him alive. The moaning ghost people were hearing in the woods was the living boy buried up to his neck. Suddenly, the hornets begin attacking Takano, covering him in a massive swarm. The comic ends with Takano saying that the hornets started to make meatballs from his flesh to feed the boy. Yeah, that was a weird one. Next up, Maptown. Maptown begins with a young newlywed couple, Hiroshi and Miki, arriving in a town called Shirube, which means guide. The town is full of signposts and maps covering almost every wall. They find the town fascinating, so they decide to stay for the night when they encounter a strange man who is desperately lost despite living here. He says he has an awful sense of direction and asks if the young couple would help guide him home. They arrive at the man's house and have tea with him and his wife. She asks what they're doing here, and Hiroshi says that they are on their honeymoon. He's embarrassed, but they don't have a lot of money, so they decided to just get on a train and stop at a random town to stay for a few days before heading back, saying that unfortunately that's all they can afford right now. The man explains that this town has a strange effect on people, causing them to slowly lose their sense of direction the longer they stay. The town is by a large dark forest that people are known to get lost in. The man calls these people the Kamikakushi, or spirited away. He says that some people believe it to be the work of Tengu, humanoid bird spirits. The man also mentions that occasionally a treasure is marked on the town maps, and the wife cuts him off. Clearly this is something he shouldn't have mentioned. The couple leave and make their way to the local inn when they find a treasure marked on one of the maps. They decide to search for it and begin digging in the spot that's marked. Sure enough, they find an urn, and it's full of ancient Japanese coins that are likely worth a fortune now. They take the coins with them and make it to the inn, where they watch out the window. They see the residents of the town constantly checking the maps as they walk to try and get around. Then they overhear 2 men having a heated exchange. They say that someone dug up a treasure and the suspects are a young couple from out of town. They say that the treasures of this town should stay in this town and that there is a search party looking for them. Hiroshi and Miki decide they must leave immediately and start making their way down to the station, but are intercepted by a group of men looking for them. They're able to escape them pretty easily since the men must rely on the maps constantly to get anywhere, and Hiroshi begins to scribble on the maps so that they can't read them. But soon the young couple find themselves lost, and since they scribbled on the maps, they have no way of knowing how to get back. Hiroshi is getting more and more frustrated, and Miki keeps trying to get his attention. Finally, he snaps, telling her to quit nagging him, but when he turns around, she's gone. And that is Maptown, the Headless Sculptures. Rumi is waiting for her kind of boyfriend Shimada to walk her home after school, but he says he's gonna stay late, helping the art teacher, Mr. Okabe. Mr. Okabe is a talented artist who's made a series of headless statues. He believes that faces are pointless in art, and so he only focuses on bodies. Shimada tells Rumi not to tell anyone that he stayed late as it's against school policy, and she heads off, commenting on how creepy this old building is. Only the art room is used, so the rest of the rooms are empty and dark. The next day, Rumi stops at Shimada's place on her way to school, but he tells her he's not feeling well and will be absent today. Rumi arrives at school to find the police outside. Turns out Mr. Okabe was murdered the night before. They find his body with its head missing. Rumi is afraid Shimada may get into trouble if she says anything about him staying last night, so she keeps her lips sealed. The next day, Shimada returns to school wearing a mask, gloves, and a winter-style uniform, even though it's the summertime. Rumi approaches him, freaking out over the murder, but Shimada's acting kinda weird. He doesn't seem to care at all about what happened to Mr. Okabe and keeps flirting with her. Meanwhile, two students head into the art room after school to retrieve some books that one of them left. They enter the creepy building and even see the spot on the ground where they must have found Mr. Okabe's body. One of the girls mentions that they never actually found the head, and then they hear a loud noise as someone enters the room behind them, and it appears to be Mr. Okabe wearing a dark cloak. Creepy. Later, Shimada brings Rumi to the building, saying he wants to show her something and that Okabe is actually alive. They wait inside for Mr. Okabe, who Shimada says should be meeting them here. Rumi notices something is different about the room. All the headless statues are gone, but one, which is covered by a white sheet. Shimada takes off his mask and there's blood coming from his mouth. He then says that Okabe has been in the room the whole time and pulls the sheet off of the sculpture to reveal Okabe's head attached to it by the neck. He throws the head to the ground and starts trying to make a move on Rumi, saying her face is beautiful. She just slaps the shit out of him, and Shimada's head does a full spin before flying off of his body. It appears it was actually a headless sculpture that had stolen Shimada's head. Rumi tries to escape, but the door is jammed, and now the sculpture that Okabe's head was on starts walking towards Rumi, trying to cut her head off. Rumi finally makes it out of the room and discovers the bodies of not just Shimada, but the other two students, all headless. In a very disturbing sequence, she also finds the rest of Okabe's sculptures all sharing the two girls' heads, like some kind of messed up Silent Hill monster. The horrific creatures make their way towards Rumi, fighting to get her head first. And that's how this one ends. Dying young. This story follows three girls, Chizuru, Ayako, and Hiroko. They're known as the ugly three at school. That is until Chizuru started to become really pretty. In only a month, she transformed into an almost different person. She was gorgeous, but she also started to look unhealthy, and then she died for no apparent reason. The remaining two friends speculate on what could have happened, and shortly after, Hiroko starts to transform as well. In fact, several of the girls at school do, and along with the beauty, the girls start looking kinda sickly. Sure enough, the girls begin dropping dead, and no one knows why. Some people think it's a strange disease, while others believe it could have something to do with the century coming to an end. Hiroko hears a rumor that the only way to survive is to kill a girl of the same age on the third Friday of every month. Then she says she's actually jealous of Ayako, who still hasn't gotten the illness. The deaths continue, and the remaining girls are looking worse for the wear. One evening, Ayako looks out her window and sees Hiroko and two other girls walking down the alley. She follows them and finds that they are looking for girls to kill since it's the third Friday of the month, but Ayako tells her to stop. One of the other pretty girls take off after her, and Hiroko decides she'll have to kill Ayako instead. But before she can, she succumbs to the illness and dies in her arms. The final panel says it's the end of the 20th century and a mysterious illness is still going around. Next up is Scarecrows. This is an interesting one. A man named Numata is forced to bury his only daughter, Yuki, shortly after losing his wife, and it's rumored that Yuki may have committed suicide. Numata visits her grave every day, and one day a man named Toshio shows up. This was Yuki's lover and wannabe fiance, but her father wouldn't allow them to marry. Numata gets pretty pissed off that Toshio is here and tells him to get lost. Toshio refuses to leave and implies that the reason Yuki may have taken her own life was because Numata wouldn't give his blessing. Numata comes back with a scarecrow from the nearby field and places it in front of Yuki's grave, saying that it keeps varmints like Toshio away and tells him once again to leave. The next day, the farmers wonder what the hell happened to their scarecrow and find it in the graveyard. Numata shows up apologizing to them and begins to explain until he realizes that the scarecrow has changed. It's grown hair and a human-like face. 4 days later, the scarecrow has grown to resemble Yuki. At the same time, a couple is visiting the grave of their young son who died from drowning in the river. This is an important detail for later. Numata attempts to bring the Yuki scarecrow home, but find it changes back to a normal scarecrow when he removes it from the graveyard. This strange incident begins to attract a crowd, and after Numata explains what happened, addition, many of the villagers begin to place their own scarecrows on the graves of their loved ones. Much like Yuki, these scarecrows begin to resemble their loved ones as well. And I gotta say, the scarecrow people are pretty freaky, man. The mother we saw earlier has made a small scarecrow and places it on the grave, hoping it will soon resemble her child. Her husband is trying to stop her, and we find out that this is actually the boy's stepfather. We see his thoughts for a second as he thinks, well, at least these scarecrows can't talk. I've got nothing to be afraid of. Yeah, that's not suspicious. Later, Toshio has a dream that he's with Yuki again and wakes up to find that he's in the graveyard even though he doesn't remember coming here. He believes that Yuki's scarecrow brought him here, and he begins to hear all the scarecrows in the graveyard begin to whisper. He freaks out and runs for his life, but is eventually stopped by the scarecrow once again. The next day, Numata comes for his daily visit and finds Toshio dead with Yuki's scarecrow on top of him. At the same time, the couple find that the scarecrow is finally resembling their boy, but his face looks very disturbed and full of hate. He won't stop staring at the stepfather with those hateful eyes, and the dude snaps from guilt and starts choking the scarecrow. However, it comes out of the ground and the man falls backward with the end of the scarecrow stabbing him. The mother then pieces together that it was her husband who killed her son, and the comic ends with the final shot of the scarecrows and Toshio and Yuki dead on the ground. I like this one in concept, but it is a little messy as to what exactly is happening page to page. That might just be the translation, but anyway, I did my best to explain it. Next up, the will. The will starts tragically with a girl, Hiroko, recounting the death of her sister, Taeko, who jumped in front of a moving train. In the clenched fist of her corpse was a handwritten will saying, "I want to place a curse and return as a ghost to haunt you." Unfortunately, blood had soaked part of the will, and the person Taeko is cursing is impossible to make out. Her family is in distress over the situation, not just because of the death of their daughter, but the fact that she would hate someone so much. We see in a flashback the last time the family saw her. After a fight with her sister, Taeko's parents intervened, and she tells them she knows the truth, that she's adopted, before storming out of the house never to return. The family wonders if the person she's cursing is in fact one of them. After this, Hiroko begins seeing the bloody ghost of Taeko in her dreams. Hoping that the person her sister cursed isn't her, Hiroko finds Taeko's best friend Uba and asks if she knew of anyone Taeko hated so much. The friend tells her about Keiko, Taeko's rival, and how the two girls hated each other passionately. That night, Hiroko hears a noise coming from Taeko's room. She walks in to find Taeko's ghost covered in blood and floating in the air. Hiroko gets her parents, and in most ghost stories like this, the ghost would be gone when the parents look, but no, they actually see Taeko as well, and they're all terrified. The ghost chases them down the stairs, dripping blood in her wake. The family runs outside, and the ghost vanishes, but Taeko returns every night to haunt them. Hiroko runs into Uba again and learns some more interesting details about her hateful relationship with Keiko. Apparently, Keiko's father had a failed business, which caused them to eventually move to another town, and Taeko would make fun of her for it. Keiko would then clap back by telling Taeko she was adopted. Later that night, Taeko appears once again, and her mother is in shambles, apologizing for giving Hiroko more attention. Taeko then asks, "Where is she?" and appears to be searching the house for someone. At the same time, a man arrives at their house. It turns out to be Keiko's father. He says that they may not believe what he's going to say, but he believes the ghost of Taeko is haunting him. He believes she's looking for his daughter, Keiko, but she'll never find her, because Keiko is dead, having committed suicide on the same day that Taeko did. It then becomes clear that the ghost in this house is actually Keiko's ghost, who is searching for Taeko, and likewise the ghost of Taeko is at Keiko's house searching for her. Because of the blood covering her body, Taeko's family mistook Keiko for their daughter. Keiko's ghost appears again, and her father tells her that Taeko is no longer in this world, and that she can rest in peace. After this, the ghost never showed up again, and Hiroko guesses that the two girls are still hating each other in the other world right now. Gift bearer. This is a weird one. It opens with a hypnotist sneaking into a house at night. The hypnotist was hired by someone to hypnotize a ruthless businessman named Okura, who is apparently evil and would straight up kill people to get what he wants. He even abuses his son and ties him up to sleep on the floor at night. The hypnotist approaches the sleeping man and says when Okura wakes up, he'll forget his selfish ways and from now on dedicate himself to society and making the city he lives in happy. There's a time jump here of about 14 years. We see Okura's son, now a man, walking around town and handing out gifts to people, although they all seem creeped out by him and refuse to accept them. The hypnotist is sitting on a bench nearby and watches this unfold, then strikes up a conversation asking why he does this. Okura's son says he's been doing this for 14 years. It's almost like a mission that he can't stop. The hypnotist accepts one of the gift boxes and finds a wooden doll inside that's the spitting image of Okura. He realizes that the gift bearer is Okura's son and decides to follow him to see what the hell is going on. The gift bearer is harassed by some kids who tell him they don't want his stupid stupid dolls and that they're demonic, with rumors of them even moving around in the middle of the night. Something the man denies, saying they're just regular dolls. As the hypnotist watches this, the doll he's holding suddenly drops from his hand. He says it feels like it moved by itself. Later, the gift bearer encounters a girl named Lisa that he seems to have a friendly relationship with. She tells him no one wants those dolls, and if he really wants to make the town happy, he should give them candy or something instead. The gift giver says that no, these gifts must be the dolls. Lisa then gets an idea. She could help him dress the dolls up cute, and then people will want them. They go to the man's house and there's a giant pile of the dolls. He explains that about 14 years ago, his father suddenly became less selfish and spent all of his time crafting these wooden dolls to try and give to people. But eventually he died, so now his son must carry out his father's mission. The hypnotist is listening in and realizes that his hypnotism went wrong. Okura's subconscious mind must have misinterpreted him. When he was told to dedicate himself to society, he took it literally. And since he only has one body, he began to make dolls of himself that he could physically give to the townspeople. He also believes that Okura's son was put into the same trance, as he might have been close enough to hear. Lisa dresses up 2 of the dolls, and the gift bearer isn't sure if his father will like it, but decides to give it a try. Suddenly a man comes barging into the house. This is Lisa's father, and he's not too happy about a strange dude hanging out with his daughter. And hey, I don't blame him. Well, he chews the gift bearer out and takes his daughter back home. As the hypnotist watches from outside, the doll he carries seems to jump out of his hand once again. We jump ahead to Christmas time, and the gift giver has decided to dress as Santa, giving out dolls once again, which are now all dressed up like the 2 Lisa made. Of course, the young teens he gives them to make fun of him, but the gift bearer carries on. He knocks on several windows trying to give away the gifts, but people just close the curtains. He even has the balls to go to Lisa's house to try to give her family the dolls, and Lisa's father dumps cold water on his head, telling him to scram. If that's not enough, the kids from earlier come out and pelt the poor guy with snowballs. All alone and freezing, the gift giver sits in an alley and lights a candle that looks exactly like an apple for some reason. The hypnotist watches from afar and decides whether he should intervene, breaking the trance, but thinks perhaps it'll break on its own soon enough. Just then, the man's bag begins moving and the dolls come walking out. It appears Okura's soul is alive in the dolls and still under the hypnosis. They begin marching through the city saying, "Bring me back, and that is the gift bearer. Kind of a strange one. The Groaning Drain. The Groaning Drain starts with a girl named Reina walking home from school and being intercepted by a hideous boy who looks like he hasn't bathed or changed his clothes in months. He touches her hair and tells her how much he's in love with her. Apparently this happens pretty frequently, as she says she wishes he would stop waiting for her here. Next, we see Reina's mother washing her hands and telling the housemaid she could do a better job cleaning the windows. She also mentions that the upstairs drain is clogged. Reina and her sister Shinri arrive home, and their mother immediately tells them to go shower and that their outfits need to be washed as well. Shinri tells Reina to shower faster, but Reina says that she needs a thorough wash since she was touched by that disgusting boy who we learn is named Kari. They discuss how their mother told them not to associate with such unhygienic people, and Shinri jokes, saying, what if she brought the boy home with her? Reina obviously rejects this idea, but Shinri explains her plan further, saying that based on her mother's extreme cleaning habits, she would freak out on Kari, hopefully frightening him off for good. Later, a plumber arrives to fix the clogged drain, and the mother takes no time going in on him for his feet being dirty. She tells him to tiptoe through the house. Then, when he actually gets to work, she yells at him for dripping pipe water on the floor. He clears a disgusting blob of something from the pipe, and the woman just goes crazy, telling him the bathroom is in a dumpster and to move it outside. Man, this lady's a real nag. At this point, the daughters come in and are freaking out as well, and the plumber's pretty annoyed, especially since it's their pipe that's all dirty. The girls feel bad for how badly their mother treated the plumber and mention how obsessive she is, like how she washes her hands every 10 minutes and bathes 4 times a day. They suggest that maybe this is why she divorced their father. The next day, Reina is heading back from school, expecting the disgusting Kari to find her again, but this time she runs into her father instead. He says he would like to see her and asks if they could get a cup of coffee, but she says that she wouldn't want to be seen with someone who looks so down and out, and that her mother wouldn't like it anyway. Man, this is a real family of assholes. Meanwhile, we see Kari waiting for Reina when he finds Shinri instead. She invites him to their house, and Kari is ecstatic, saying he spent so much time trying to find it. Well, that's creepy. Shinri tells him to wait outside for a second, and after a few moments, the second floor window opens up. Shinri's mom pops out and starts pelting Kari with eggs. She calls him a disgusting creature and tells him to go away. Shinri shows up by her side with a big bowl of eggs, and her mother continues to throw him at him until he finally leaves. Reina spots him as she returns home and scolds Shinri for not minding her own business, especially since now he knows where they live, something she worked looked really hard to avoid. That night, we see a figure climbing over the fence and sneaking into their house. Apparently, their mother notices this and comes out with a baseball bat, smashing the person on the head repeatedly. They turn the lights on to find not Kari, but the girl's father, and now he's dead. Later, we see some neighbors talking gossip. One says that the woman in this house beat her ex-husband to death after he broke into the house with a knife. Inside, the mother is yelling at the maid to remove the bloodstain, but it seems hard to remove. We learn that the mother added a knife to their father's hand to make it seem more like self-defense and told the girls to corroborate her lie. In the other room, their mom is still screaming to clean harder, and the maid has finally had enough. She tells her to clean it herself and walks out. Later, the mother washes her hands in the sink, and it's clear that it's been clogged up again. It also starts making a strange groaning noise. They go outside and find that the drain pipe that all the other pipes lead to seems to be clogged up, and this is the source of all of their problems. In order to try to clear the drain, they boil a pot of water and dump it down the pipe. It doesn't seem to help much, and on top of that, the strange groans become louder and more frantic, as if in pain. Later, the mother tries her hand at removing the blood stain and scrubs it for hours. She gets blood on her hands and freaks out, washing them over and over. As she does this, a hand comes out of the clogged sink and grabs her arm. The girls come in to see what happened, but obviously don't believe her. Either way, their mother's arm is still all sticky where the hand grabbed her, and she begins to scrub it. Reina goes out to find someone to unclog the pipe, but the plumber from before says he doesn't want to deal with her bitchy mom. She returns home to find her mother scrubbing her own skin off her arms. It's a pretty disturbing sight. An ambulance comes out and takes her away, and the girls stay in the house. The kitchen sink begins spraying out water, and the house is filled with a terrible smell. Shinri says she recognizes it as the odor of Kari, the gross boy. She then freaks out, coming up with a crazy theory that Kari is hiding in the drain pipe, and that's why the pipes have gotten clogged. Reina just laughs it off, asking how Kari could have gotten into the pipe when he's that big. That night, Shinri is showering when she begins hearing groans from the shower drain. Then she sees the grate lift up and just runs like hell. She tells Reina, and they return to find that the drain grate is off, but nothing else unusual. Reina begins to mock Shinri, saying, "Didn't you say he was hiding in the pipe? Then pull him up." She then forces Shinri's hand into the drain. Shinri says there's something gross in the drain that's moving. Suddenly, her entire arm gets pulled in. She cries for help, but Reina just assumes she's playing a trick or something and leaves. After a while, Reina's like, man, she's really committed to this bit, huh? She walks back into the bathroom and finds only Shinri's legs sticking out of the drain, and they are being pulled in a truly disturbing manner. We can even hear her bones snapping as she goes down the pipe. As Reina freaks out, the comic ends with her simply stating that she believes her sister and that there are now two people in the clogged drain. Okay, that's all I got for you this week, and I'll be back next time with even more Junji Ito, so stay tuned. Thank you to everyone for watching. If you like the intro and outro music that's likely playing right now, go check out Kill Me Katie. And of course, big shout out to my patrons. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.